You know, there are some moments in history that totally change the game, but somehow fly under the radar. That's exactly what we're talking about today. The Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848. It's a conflict that's often overlooked, but it didn't just add a huge chunk of territory to the United States. It put the nation on a collision course with itself, leading straight to the Civil War.
Okay, so to really get a handle on just how massive the impact of this war was, all you have to do is look at these two maps. On the left, that's North America before the war. And on the right, that's what it looked like just a few years later. In 2 short years, the United States literally redrew the continent, creating the basic shape of the country we know today. It's pretty staggering.
So how do we get from one map to the other? Well, here's the game plan for this explainer. We're going to start with the ambitions that lit the fuse. Then, we'll see how the war was basically started on purpose. We'll look at the incredible territorial changes, how this new land started to tear the Union apart, and finally, the very real human cost for the people who were already living there.
All right, so where did this all start? Well, the immediate spark, you could say, was Texas. But the fuel for that fire, it had been building up for years, really driven by this powerful American cocktail of ambition and what they called expansionist fever. Okay, so let's rewind to 1836. Texas declares independence from Mexico. But, and this is a huge but, Mexico never actually recognized it. To them, Texas was just a rebellious province. For almost 10 years, the U.S. kind of nervously side-eyed annexing it because they knew it would probably mean war. But that all changed in 1844 with James K. Polk. This guy got elected on pretty much one promise: make America bigger. And in 1845, he did just that, formally annexing Texas. As you can imagine, Mexico saw this as a massive act of aggression.
Now, Polk wasn't just some rogue president acting alone. He was tapping into a really powerful idea that was sweeping the nation at the time: manifest destiny. This was this idea, this feeling, really, that the U.S. was basically destined by God to stretch all the way across the continent, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. It wasn't just an opportunity. For many, it felt like a sacred duty. And this belief, it was the engine for everything that was about to happen.
But Polk's shopping list didn't just end with Texas. Oh no, he had his eyes on the prize further west. He wanted California and New Mexico. And when Mexico wouldn't sell, he basically decided to pick a fight to take them by force.
And this is where things get really clever, or sneaky, depending on how you look at it. It all came down to a border dispute. See, after the U.S. annexed Texas, it claimed the border was the Rio Grande River. But Mexico had always maintained the border was the Nueces River, way further north. This created this huge disputed territory between the two rivers, and Polk saw his chance.
So Polk's first move was to try and play nice. He sent a diplomat to Mexico City to see if he could just buy California and New Mexico. As you can imagine, Mexico was not amused. They said no, flat out. So, plan B. Polk ordered General Zachary Taylor and his troops right into that disputed zone, marching them all the way down to the banks of the Rio Grande. It was a clear provocation, and everyone knew it.
And, well, he got exactly what he was hoping for: a fight. Mexican forces finally engaged the American troops, and 11 U.S. soldiers were killed. That was all Polk needed. He went straight to Congress and delivered this bombshell of a line: American blood has been shed on American soil. Of course, he kind of left out the part where Mexico, and pretty much the rest of the world, saw that as Mexican soil. But hey, it was a fantastic soundbite. It worked like a charm, and Congress declared war.
The war that followed was pretty one-sided, to be honest. The U.S. military was better equipped and better led. It was a decisive American victory. And the prize for winning? It was huge, all formalized in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. Now, part of the deal was that the U.S. paid Mexico $15 million. And yeah, it might sound like they were buying the land, but let's be real. This was a deal made with a defeated country that had zero leverage. It was less of a purchase and more of a coerced sale. So what did $15 million get you back then? A whole lot, it turns out. We're talking about a massive chunk of land called the Mexican Cession. This land would eventually become all or part of California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming. Just like that, Mexico lost more than half its territory. It's staggering to think about. But with all this new land came a massive, massive problem. A question that the country had been trying to ignore for decades,
suddenly exploded into the open. Is this new territory going to be free, or is it going to be slave territory? The fight over that question would rip the country apart.
The debate was instant and it was ugly. On one hand, you had the expansionists patting themselves on the back, talking about manifest destiny and new opportunities. But on the other hand, you had powerful abolitionist voices like Frederick Douglass calling it what he saw it as, a cynical, calculated plot to expand the power of slave-owning states. He argued this wasn't about destiny, it was about creating more slave states to give the South more political power in Washington.
And this fight wasn't just in newspapers. It hit the floor of Congress hard with something called the Wilmot Proviso. This was a proposal to ban slavery in any of the new lands won from Mexico. Now, the proviso itself, it failed. It never became law, but that almost doesn't matter. What it did was draw a line in the sand. It forced every politician to pick a side, creating the political fault lines that would crack wide open during the Civil War.
And the opposition wasn't just happening in Washington. It was personal, it was moral. The most famous example, of course, is Henry David Thoreau. He saw the war as totally unjust, a land grab for slavery, and he refused to pay a tax that helped fund it. He ends up spending a night in jail for it, and that one night inspires him to write one of the most influential essays ever, Civil Disobedience, which argues that good people have a duty to break bad laws.
But look, beyond all the maps and the politics, we have to remember that this land wasn't empty. Hundreds of thousands of people lived there. They were citizens of Mexico, and then, one day, they woke up and were told they were now in the United States. And for them, everything was about to change, and almost none of it for the better.
On paper, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo sounded okay. It promised that the Mexican citizens living in these new territories would get U.S. citizenship and that their property rights would be protected. But the reality? It was a completely different story. It was a story of broken promises, of land theft through complicated legal tricks, of violence, and of a systematic stripping away of their political and economic power. And if things were bad for Mexican Americans, for the native peoples of the region, it was catastrophic. Just look at this chart. Mexican Americans were at least offered a path to citizenship, even if it was a broken promise. Indigenous peoples, they weren't offered anything at all. For them, American expansion was a disaster, bringing violent conflict, being forced off their ancestral lands, and the total destruction of their way of life. And this wasn't just about legal status, it was about brutal violence that went on for decades. One of the most horrifying examples is the Sand Creek Massacre in 1864. A U.S. militia attacked a peaceful village of Cheyenne and Arapaho people who thought they were under American protection. They slaughtered over 150 people. The vast majority were women and children. It was an absolute atrocity and a terrifying glimpse into the reality of expansion for indigenous people.
So when you step back and look at the whole picture, the legacy of this war is just immense, and it's complicated. It absolutely slammed the accelerator on the road to the Civil War. It forced Americans to really confront the morality of what they were doing. It completely upended the lives of millions of people, and it laid the groundwork for conflicts over borders, identity, and civil rights that we are still grappling with today.
And that really brings us to the final takeaway here. This stuff isn't just dusty old history. The fights that started back then, over land, over who belongs, over what rights people have, they haven't gone away. So the question I'll leave you with is this. How do the echoes of what happened back in the 1840s still shape our world, our countries, and our conversations, right here, right now?